SOT's 15th edition Guardians of the Future. My name is Amna Kasuri, and I will be moderating today's session titled Growing Up Safe, Preventing and Responding to Child Abuse. Thank you all for joining us here. According to Sahil, one of the Pakistan's leading NGOs that focuses on child protection, 12 children were abused each day in the first half of this year alone. And that is why, when I opened my first orphanage, child protection was my topmost priority. Today, we have gathered leading experts and thought leaders in the areas of child safety and protection with the hope to learn from them on how children can be protected and nurtured during their formative years. Please let us know if you have any questions. Before we begin, I would like to quickly introduce our distinguished panelists. Dr. Naeem Zafar, please. Yes, please. Dr. Naeem Zafar is the president of Pehchan, a not-for-profit child rights and protection organization working to enhance and better the future of Pakistani families. He is also the president of Pakistan's Pediatric Association Punjab and a board member of the International Society for Prevention of Abuse and Neglect. He has also founded the first hospital-based child protection unit in South Asia for managing abused and neglected children, as well as the first child rights department at the University of Lahore. Thank you, Dr. Saab, for joining us here. Do we have Nina here online? Do we have our online panelists? Next on our panel, we have Professor Maggie Atkinson, please. Can you join us? Maggie has worked for the interests of children since starting to teach in 1979. She was the Director of Children's Services, encompassing all services to 46,000 children and young people in one city, then England's second Children's Commissioner, whose role in law is to promote, protect, and ensure the rights of the child, not the adults who hold the power. She now works in consultancy, pressing every place in England to safeguard children as a duty. Great to have you, Maggie. Then we have Shayan Malik. Shayan, can you come on the stage? Shayan Malik, she is the CEO of Samanzar, a design enterprise popular for its blend of history and culture in bridal couture and interior design. Malik has also established skill centers in remote villages of Punjab, Sindh, Swat, and Thapakar to promote indigenous crafts. Thank you, Shayan.
Thank you.
Yeah. We have Nina Adlin Disney. Nina has been involved in the Malaysian education system for the past 30 years as a lecturer, researcher, consultant, publisher, and most importantly, as a mother of 3. She is currently executive director at Leap Ed Services, a social enterprise committed to education transformation. In 2021, she was awarded a Lifetime Achievement Award for Education Excellence and now serves as an adjunct professor for strategic education planning at Unitar International University. Thank you, Nina, for joining us here.
Thank you for having me.
And last but certainly not least, we have with us Deborah Henry. Deborah Henry is an international model who was crowned Miss Universe Malaysia 2011 and Miss World Malaysia 2007. She moderates international conferences, and she is currently the host of a women's focus talk show, Women Talk, on a Malaysian TV channel. She is a dedicated humanitarian championing the lives of refugee children in Malaysia. Henry co-founded a non-profit called Fuji.org which runs a school for refugee children in Kuala Lumpur. In the last 5 years, she has also become a full-fledged socialpreneur, managing Fugila, a social enterprise, conscious jewelry brand that channels profits to educate refugee children and offers job to youth. Thank you all for being here with us.
Thank you.
So I would like to open the session by asking the panelists why they feel child abuse is on the rise globally. So should we start with Maggie? Yeah.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Jolly good.
Yeah.
I think it's not just the very top end of child abuse where a child is in crisis or has been seriously harmed physically, emotionally, psychologically. I think there are many, many children who are, at least to some degree, suffering from not being taken seriously, not being listened to. Even in fairly high-class households, there will be children who go home from school and have no conversation with anybody. They go to their room, they eat in their room, and they stay on social media, as Sean Covey was telling us yesterday, for 35 hours a week, which is a very dangerous environment, however glorious it is and whatever learning you do. For me, the prevention angle of this is the most important. This is everybody's business. You know, our African friends would say it takes the village to raise the child. They would also tell you about the concept of Ubuntu.
Yeah.
Ubuntu means I am only me because you are you. And I can only be me if I accept that you are you, and it's two-way and it's mutual. So what does that come down to? If your child comes home from school with a worry about a friend and nobody has said anything to anybody about that friend, it is actually your duty to say something to somebody, whether it's the school, that child's parents, or if it's really serious, the authorities. It also comes down to, and the doctor and I have been talking about this for 2 days now, everybody being conscious in every professional body, from schools through nurseries to social care to volunteering services to medicine, to talk to each other if you have a family in common where you're all worried. Not to keep it to yourself, not to say somebody else will deal with it. It's my responsibility.
Yeah.
So I'll stop in a moment and hand to your next panelist, but I would give you an example from my days as a teacher. We had a girl who became quieter and quieter and quieter in class and less likely to take off her blazer so that you could see how she was even on the warmest days. And it was only when a friend of hers hung back at the end of a lesson with an excuse to talk to me, who said, you need to understand that child A, I won't give her name, is not eating, and nobody's noticed. And it was then my responsibility to take it to somebody else. I was her English teacher, but I had to talk to our pastoral team in that school, and I had to make sure that her parents were aware, and we had to bring in the school nurse and others to help to keep her safe. And she didn't want us to keep her safe. She wanted to starve herself. She was very seriously ill, mentally as well as physically. And it was only that her friend had brought it to me that made it come alive for everybody. And we did manage to bring her round. But it was her friend's bravery in talking to an adult she trusted that brought it to the top. And that's really important. Folks, if you teach, if you're a youth worker, if you're a voluntary organisation, if you're a young person, it's everybody's duty. We carry each other as human beings. We are not on this earth alone. And it matters enormously. And you stop abuse at the top end by getting in at the bottom. On day one, the first minute, the first time you know. And you carry it. You don't put it down. You don't pass it on and forget it. You carry it together. Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you, Maggie. Dr. Saab, would you like to say something?
Well, if we talk about the prevalence of child abuse, you may not be shocked, but the current estimate by the WHO all over the world is out of 2 billion children, 1 billion are abused annually. So when we are talking about child abuse,
that's a lot.
that is the magnitude.
Yeah.
1 in 4 girls and 1 in 8 boys have been sexually assaulted by the time they reach their adulthood. In Pakistan, the corporal punishment, the slapping, beating, is taken as a norm. Emotional trauma, peer interactions leading to severe psychological depressions are a norm. Even the sexual abuse is taken to be a part of a cultural thing in some parts of the country, which is the most unfortunate part. Why is it rising? Because of more awareness. It has always been there, hushed up under the carpet. It's coming up now. Unfortunately, yes, because of the economic disturbances, because of the crises, and also because of the environmental and the climate crisis, it is on the rise. But overall, more of the rise is because of more awareness. And that comes probably as a blessing, because then we can do something about it.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Ji Shayan.
I think that child abuse is rising because, number one, there's really a lack of awareness of what exactly is child abuse. That is very important for a society to be made aware that what all constitutes child abuse. I have worked for the last 4 years with street children, and the thing is that people do not even realize that when you see a child on the streets begging and you give them money from out of your small change, you yourself are indulging in child abuse because you have not thought about the consequences, the seriousness of what exactly you are doing, which form of child abuse you are promoting with just giving that money. Because this particular child abuse is actually a very evil industry. And unfortunately, in our country, it's considered that it's not such a big deal because the child is poor, but there's no such thing as poverty to make a child trafficked. So it's lack of awareness. And the other thing I would say is one person, literally one person, can change abuse, because what we have is that we do not have our laws implemented. We have the legislation, we have the policies, but we do not have implementation, and we do not have the will to implement. And I have, because now worked a lot with government, and I have seen that one person at the top who agrees that yes, this constitutes child abuse and we should change it, makes the difference. The minute the person from the government is transferred out, someone else comes in and thinks that this is not an important point, and it finishes there. So really, I think child abuse is rising because each of us has not understood our duty to report. That's my take on it.
Very good points. Thank you. Yes, Nina, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Would you like to add something, please?
Yes, absolutely. I would like to echo what all three previous panelists have said. Number one, Dr. Naeem pointed out that is it really a question of cases rising, or maybe, thankfully, we are just more aware of it and there's more
reporting and therefore giving the perception that it is on the rise. But as he correctly pointed out, child abuse has been a phenomenon which has been hushed up. There is a lot of cultural taboos surrounding this issue. So perhaps it is a blessing in disguise that we are more aware of it, even though it might give the appearance of a rise. The second point that Professor Maggie Atkinson brought up was the fact that it is everybody's responsibility. And I could not agree with that more, and that the focus should be on prevention rather than cure. However, there is a problem in that people need to be educated, that awareness. You need to be, build the capacity to be able to recognize the signs of child abuse. And not just amongst teachers and counselors, but amongst students themselves. So it is something where we have to take a child-centered approach. And this is something that we have trialed in schools in Malaysia. I come from a social enterprise, an organization that works with schools, with regular public schools in Malaysia. And what we have tried to do is to raise awareness, to build capacity. And it has to be very much contextualized to the context. Yeah, it has to be training and capacity that gives teachers and everyone involved with children the confidence to know what to do.
Yeah.
Right? And not to be afraid. And this is the problem, that sometimes students are afraid to come forward. So it's about creating safe spaces, creating an environment where people feel comfortable to come forward, but also that they have the capacity and the confidence to know what to do. For example, what is the legislation in Malaysia or in Pakistan or in any other country? What are the agencies that are out there that you can draw upon? What is the procedure even within a school? Many schools, it's like something that's not actually even addressed. There are no procedures in many schools. There are no safeguarding or child protection policies. So this is something that in Malaysia we are trying very hard to advocate with a lot of like-minded social enterprises and NGOs, but it's a tough job.
Thank
It's
you,
slow,
Nina.
but slow.
Yeah. Thank you, Nina. Yes, Deborah.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. Nice to be here, although we're speaking to you virtually from Malaysia, something we've all gotten quite used to. I fully concur with the four panelists before me. I think they've said it all. If I may just spotlight marginalized communities, such as refugees, displaced people, stateless individuals. So as of today, we see a consistent and rising refugee number. I think the number's at over 100 million, of which you're looking at about 36 million being children. And think about child abuse and child protection under very, very vulnerable circumstances. This is where family units are broken down. There's a huge amount of desperation, instability, insecurity. Families are having to flee their homes, live in temporary shelters, find resettlement in foreign lands. And imagine families being able to not only have to deal with their immediate needs, urgent needs, but also then think about the children in the process. And so all along the spectrum, there are so many chances and opportunities for children to be abused, to be exploited, taken advantage of. And often the trauma is great. It's too great. It's not dealt with. There aren't clear, as Nina was saying before me, there aren't clear avenues and pathways for them to search for help, support, and to know that if they speak up, they are going to be protected and not further punished, which often happens. And so, a girl could be raped by a family member and will not come forward because she knows that she's going to probably it'll be worse than just the rape itself. And so in this situation, and we mentioned now with climate change and whatnot, how do we tackle child abuse and protection under very fragile circumstances? So that's the work that my organization does in Malaysia, and we can talk about it a bit more, but working with partners. It's a multi-stakeholder approach, building community capacity, as well as, said before me, the resilience and education piece within children and families.
Thank you. Amazing, amazing. Thank you. So I would like to ask Dr. Naeem Zafar. Dr. Saab, the concept of child abuse is not well understood in Pakistan, as we all know. What are the different forms of child abuse that people need to be aware of?
Well, if we talk about definitions, you will learn and go home and forget. Let me give you an example. There is a 12-year-old girl working in somebody's house as a domestic help. She comes from a family of 8 brothers and sisters and has been left alone. Do you think she is neglected by her family? So if the parents, she wants to be with the parents are not ready to take her, and she's sent away. When at night, after the day's hard work, she goes and sleeps in the kitchen floor, what does she think of? The little child that she's kept here to care for sleeps in the mother's lap. Where am I? Doesn't she feel neglected? That is neglect.
Yeah.
Now, when she is doing her job and she's not doing it properly, obviously she's clumsy at times, she's admonished unnecessarily. She is looked down upon. When in the morning, the boys and the girls of the house, they get ready and go to the school, she polishes their shoes and looks up to them. She is emotionally traumatized. That's emotional trauma. She is working there for 12 hours, 14 hours. How much does a normal laborer work? How much do the teachers and the students or the others, the workers, they work according to the government regulations, 8 hours, 40 hours a week. So how much is she working? 70 hours, 80 hours. What is she getting in return? Nothing. Because all the money is given to the parents, probably at the beginning of the contract and never thereafter. She is asked to do the jobs which she cannot do. They are so heavy. And then she is beaten. That's physical abuse. And if there is an adolescent at home, or maybe somebody else who touches her in a bad way, or utilizes her body, that is sexual abuse. And if at all she gets some money out of it, that is commercial exploitation. So that's the easiest way I can explain the definition of child abuse.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Thank you. Shayan, my next question would be for you. What can the law enforcement agencies and government bodies do to put a halt to this evil? What challenges did you have and how did you get involved?
Okay, so how I got, answer the second part. How I got involved with child abuse was because I was working, I was training entrepreneurs in rural villages. I was working for indigenous craft, and there I was setting up centers. And I would notice whenever I would go there, one child or the other used to be maybe 13, 14, would be pregnant. So that is also a child abuse, which is child marriage. When a child is not having any control over their own lives, their own bodies. And there are children who are married at the age of 13, 14, and then by the time that they are 30, they have 10, 12 children, and those children are considered an asset for the families, for the communities, because they are then put to labor as well.
Yeah.
So it was a very disturbing situation, and I formed Save Our Children Foundation because I felt that there was a lot of work that needed to be done in this area. And after having the foundation, I realized that we cannot do this without the support of the government. We have to work with the government. And the first person, the point of contact was the police. So I did receive a lot of flack that, you know, our police will not help you, and they encourage child labor themselves and a part of this. So, but I think that I started working thinking that if I don't, then I will never get anywhere. And really, it's heartening to say that the amount of help that I have received in this aspect from the government authorities who we think will never reach out and help in the type of work that we are doing is really wrong. They are as empathetic as we are, and wherever they can help, they do. So it's a struggle, it's a long, I think it's going to be even a long process, because as I say, even our forces do not really know what are the laws that apply. And until the legal system does not work with them to give them education about how and what laws apply and what can be we can implement in courts, and people can start to get some form of reprimand or some form of punishment when you are abusing a child. There need to be consequences. And we are working towards that. We do massive trainings for police, child protection officers, and without trainings, it's not going to be possible. So it's a long process, but I can say that we have so many success stories that we should never lose hope and think that eventually we'll get there together, hand-holding, all of us as one.
Maggie, would you perhaps add something to that?
I think what I would add is that, as Cheyenne has said, there are probably already laws and policies. But the big thing I would draw everybody's attention to in this room is that there's only one nation on this planet that has not signed the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child, and that's the USA. So if you work in any of the countries where Beacon House works, your nation has signed that treaty. And that treaty, look on the UNICEF website for a summary. You can get it on one page of A4, but it's backed by very great detail. And it's as binding a treaty as a treaty that would end a war. And it speaks of the right of the child to be safe, to be nurtured, to be educated as a tolerant citizen. Primarily also, however, to have their voices not only heard, but listened to. And I'll add a story to the doctors of a little boy whose name I can use. His name was Arthur Labinho Hughes. And he was English, and he told his school, and his school told everybody else, that this is a 6-year-old, and if you're going to cry, get ready. This is a 6-year-old who goes into school and says, nobody loves me, and they're not feeding me, and I'm thirsty, and I don't have a bed, so I'm really tired. And his teachers raise the alarm, and the authorities say, the house is clean, everything's fine, parenting is good enough. And that little boy was made to kneel on a hard floor with his face against the wall for hours at a time if his stepmother considered that it wasn't good enough, his behavior. And his stepmother and his birth father exchanged horrendous text messages about him as if he were a criminal and deserved to be punished. And they did starve him, and they did deprive him of sleep and water and love, and there was no affection. And he told his grandparents and his uncles and his aunties, and somehow, nobody acted. And the final act, his stepmother and his birth father ensured that he died. This is in England. Now that's an extreme case. Social workers save hundreds of thousands of children a year in my country. So do police who work alongside them. So do teachers, so do youth workers, so do voluntary organisations. There are nearly 12 million children in England, but 1 a week dies at the hands of people who should be loving, supporting and nurturing them. And my nation is not only a signatory of the UNCRC, it's a ratifying treaty state party. And there are days in my professional life when I am ashamed. And we should be.
Thank you, Maggie. Nina, since you have been involved in the Malaysian education system, I would like to ask you, how should school counselors, nurses or teachers approach the subject of child abuse with students? How would the approach vary for students in primary school versus those in middle or high school? Over to you, Nina.
Okay, thank you. Well, there are ages and stages, but it is, as we said from the start, everybody's responsibility. But understood, there are cultural reservations, right? There are certain things that we, as Asians, and especially as Muslims, as many people are in Malaysia, there are many subjects that are considered taboo. Having said that, that is the role of education. The role of education is to be able to raise these issues in a sensitive way that does not offend, but that places the interest of the child at heart. So to anybody who says, oh, we don't need this kind of, awareness, this is a Western import, my goodness, there is nothing more universal than the right of a child. So if people, I really have no score by people who say this is a Western import, this is not something that we want to have in our country. As Professor Maggie has said, every country on earth, right, has signed up, apart from one, apart from the USA, has signed up to the United Nations Conventions on the Rights of a Child. So the framework is there. It is a framework that is universal. I'm sorry, it is not something that is a Western import. There is nothing more universal than the right of a child. The problem, as Cheyenne has mentioned, is implementation. There's a lot of countries with very good legislative frameworks, but it is not properly implemented, and Malaysia is a classic case. We have a lot of good frameworks and blueprints and plans, but we can't manage to turn the rhetoric into reality. And the way that we do that, in answer to your question, Amna, is to go into schools. I'm afraid it's as difficult as that, one school at a time if need be, to ensure that counselors, teachers, and students themselves have the awareness, have the training, and it cannot be something that is just a touch and go. You've done a training on, child protection, safeguarding, tick box, done, finished. It cannot be tick box. It's got to be something that is embedded. Once you have the awareness from a workshop or a training, it has got to be something that is embedded in the culture of the school. It has got to be something that is practiced as an everyday behavior and not just a tick box training that you've done and you forget about. So unfortunately, there is no easy solution to this. It is a question of each and every school, raising the awareness and giving their school communities the tools to be able to handle and to deal with not just child abuse, but to safeguard the children under their care.
Thank you, Nina. Deborah, I'd like to ask you, in all the work you have done with children, what are some of the behavioral and emotional consequences you have seen in children that have suffered abuse and neglect? And what are the challenges one can face when working with such children?
Thank you. Well, just to continue from what the panelists have said so far, often we think trauma has to be something extremely horrible and grave, but more and more studies that are coming out now show us that trauma actually can be, not to make it sound lighter or less serious, but smaller, less significant things, that issues that we perhaps think are not such a big deal. And that can be trauma for a child and affects them lifelong if not dealt with. So coming back to the demographic of refugees and stateless children, these kids are already existing, well, not even within the framework very often, because the CRC, and like, for example, in Malaysia, we say all children have the right to education, but we, in brackets, it's except only Malaysian children. So what happens to all the non-Malaysians that are in our country? And we have about 47,000 refugee children here, not to mention stateless children. So not having that legal framework, when problems arise, where do they turn to, right? And so some of the key issues we have to deal with here, and they were touched on earlier, are trafficking, child marriage that exists, detention, unlawful detention that is not adhering to international law, SGB, baby selling, and of course child labor. So when you're dealing with communities that don't fall under the protection of the law, who do they turn to? And then of course, as mentioned, you have the education, cultural bit that needs, literacy bit that needs to be tackled. Looking at all the various stakeholders, how do they solve the problem? What does working from the ground up look like? And building capacity. So if I may give you an example from the Rohingya community here, many of them come to Malaysia via boat. And so there was a group of young boys and young men who came to Malaysia, and they actually developed beriberi disease, a disease actually the world has eradicated. It's a vitamin deficiency that they had. When they got off the boat, and they were trafficked here, they had to pay the traffickers in order to not kill their families or kill them, and they could not walk. We had to spend more than a year rehabilitating these children and young men to be able to walk again. And who could we turn to in our country? Which legal system, which authority could we turn to deal with this matter from any perspective, legal, social, medical? No one really. And so it was all managed by UN agencies, by NGOs here. So these are the kind of traumas that children are going through when they are displaced in travel. Just to touch on another one quickly, you look at detention. Kids are put into detention centers in Malaysia. Children left in there for weeks. You have minors who travel alone. So having the CRC is one thing, but coming back to the point in implementation, and then you need a very robust multi-stakeholder approach, because if we sit and wait for policy, for government, for the bigger bodies to do what they need to do, it's too late. So that's where civil society and NGOs have to mobilize to tackle the issues. But many slip through the cracks, many children slip through the cracks. Often it can be too late to get them the help that they need, but therein lies our jobs as nonprofits to be able to really work at a community level with those in need. Education, like has been echoed many times, plays a huge role in you gotta go from all angles to try to reduce the numbers of suffering.
Thank you, Deborah. Great inputs by Deborah and Nina. Would any of our other panelists would like to add anything? Yes, please, Maggie.
Folks, I think we just need to cut to the chase here. Children can't level the playing field for themselves. Children hold no power in society. They are citizens the moment they are born. They're not waiting to be citizens. This is not a bus queue. If you work with children, the primary question in your mind when you meet one who is broken or hurting or lashing out because they don't know what to do with their grief and their anger and their frustration and their trauma, as Deborah has just said, place yourself in the quietest spot you can find in your mind and ask yourself, would any of this be good enough for my child? And if your answer to that in any fraction of it is actually no, it wouldn't, then what are you, as a holder of power because you are an adult, going to do with it? Going to do with that knowledge? Going to do with what you hear and see and experience from that child? You can't do it on your own. Deborah's absolutely right. This is multi-agency. This is not just teachers, counsellors, school nurses, social workers, youth workers. It's every neighbour, it's every faith leader, it's every friend. It's the person in my setting in England. We are across a very busy main road from my local primary school. I know that the crossing supervisor, the man with the stop sign who can make the traffic stop, I know he knows every child. And I know that when he takes that stop sign back to the school, if he sees one who's clearly troubled, he will say something. The notion of never too small to be noticed matters enormously. You'll stop the top end where they're abused to the point where they die if you stop the bottom end, is my point. And that's what the UN Convention talks about, and it's what your laws probably talk about, and it's what all of us have to do. But train yourselves is the final thing I would say. You can't do it unless you know what you're talking about. Thank you.
Shayan would like to say something.
Yeah, I totally agree that what Maggie, what Nina, everyone said, is that the child is actually the most important part. We should not think that children are irrelevant. Right now, what we think is, oh, you know, it's a child and let them grow up. But I think that we need to do something concrete. And when we see a small child who has been picked up or raped, or you know, something has happened, it is a lot of neglect by the parents themselves. Parents they're not aware of the fact that there is a lot of evil in the society. So children need to be protected everywhere. And I think the very easy way of giving this awareness is like, media is also responsible. There should be specific programs for parents to learn what is child safety, how to take care of their children, what are the responsibilities of parents, what are the responsibilities of teachers. And the easiest way that one can do it is because you can just have it like on your phone. When you call someone, and if there's a little recording which tells you about the difficulties and the safeties that one should ensure when your child is going to school, or you're sending a child in the car without supervision, or sending the child to go and get groceries without supervision, how difficult that is. Of course, when you see that a little girl is, she has a child at a very young age, you can't expect her to be a very responsible mother. But at the same time, we can become a responsible society, and we can keep giving little messages. And I think awareness and media is very important, and we should have these small messages which do come from time to time on our phones when we talk, so that everyone realizes that children are one of the most important people, and they need care, and they need to be taken care of.
Absolutely. Media can play a positive role. Ji, Dr. Saab?
When we talk of Convention on the Right of the Child, and we talk of laws and regulations, we think that we are talking in the 20th and the 21st century, and the things have come in now. No, they have not. Child protection as a concept has been in every religion. Islam teaches about child rights. We must never forget that. We must know that it is entrenched in our religion. Our holy prophets, Uswa Hasna, tells us a lot about it. We talk of shafqat, we talk of pyar. His slave, when he grew up, he said during all his stay with the Holy Prophet, he was never even admonished not to be punished or slapped. So we have those things in our religion. We only have to go back and start loving children, which is a part of our religion, and things can get better immediately.
Thank you, Dr. Saab. Nina, would you like to add something?
No, I'd be really interested interested to see if there are any questions from the audience, or to
Okay, so Nina,
respond
I'd
to any
like to ask
questions.
you, like, what laws should be enacted and what actions taken by law enforcement agencies to protect children? And should these be the same in developing or developed countries?
Okay, well, as I said earlier, I think everything should be contextualized, but the basic rights of a child are universal. So I don't think we can run away from that. But obviously, the context of how they are implemented will differ from country to country.
Okay.
But the basic rights of a child that we've been talking about in terms of, the right to education, to be loved, to be nurtured, not to be harmed physically and emotionally, that is universal. And as Dr. Naima said, there is no religion that would not endorse that position. So, I find it quite puzzling when those in power often say, oh, no, this is not something that we would be able to apply in this country because of our cultural norms. But it is something that needs more transparency, right, in terms of having those conversations and having a safe space where children and others working with children will be listened to. This is something that Professor Maggie has said. It's not just a question of speaking up. Yes, you might have the confidence to speak up, but if nobody listens to you, then it really, it really doesn't matter. So similarly with the legal framework and the legal content, that will differ from country to country in terms of, the procedures and, the legalities of it. But the content and the basic rights of the child are universal. But it does mean that we as a society must be prepared to speak up and to listen to those who are speaking up.
Thank you, Nina.
And if I may add, it's also, it is a question of resource allocation. So you look in Malaysia and many other countries, it's one thing having the laws there, but are the police adequately trained? Do you have a child protection unit? Do you have a hotline for children to call? Do you have well-trained counselors in all schools, in all child facilities, in police stations? If a child is abused, who speaks to the child? What do the hospitals look like? And so it takes, this is where, where civil society has the power to pressure, encourage, persuade our constituents, our parliamentarians, our governments to allocate the budget. Because if you don't put money to any of these things, having all the laws in the world is as good as this wonderful certificate on the wall that really means nothing.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. And you can have all the money in the world, but as you said, Deborah, and as I said earlier, if people don't have the capacity, the knowledge, the confidence to be able to know what to do in those circumstances, it's also, pointless.
Thank you, Nina. Maggie, I'd like to ask you, in the Pakistani paradigm, children often have to work to survive, sometimes in adverse conditions. Do you think that this constitutes abuse? And how can it be avoided in a country with a weak social welfare system?
I agree with the doctor that there are many elements to that circumstance which do constitute abuse. I do recognise that there will be many families in many parts of your country who will need whatever resource a child brings in from the work that they do in order to keep a roof over everybody's head. But I come back to the point at which that child actually loses their childhood because they are working however many days they are working in a week. And there has surely to be a means in any country, and I come back to what Deborah and Nina have just said about resourcing and truly backing what you need or what you think you need to do for your children. There is no point just using the words. You have to resource it. You have to train people to look for it. Certainly in my country, if you employed an under 16-year-old, you would probably be taken to law for doing it now. But, I come from a mining background, and 150 years ago, children as young as 6 went down the mines and worked in the dark for 12 hours a day for pennies. So there is a history in every country, I think, of children being seen as part of the labour force.
Absolutely, yeah.
And it's about the country's mentality and the means of spending on the social welfare rather than on other projects.
Yeah.
Anybody can build glittering palaces and shopping malls. What are you doing for your poor? That's for me, and for me, that's a question back at home as much as it is for you guys. We hide our poverty brilliantly in the UK, but there's a lot of it. A third of my country's children go to bed hungry every night and go to school hungry the next morning, and it's not on. So we need, this is as collective as anything else we've talked about.
Thank you.
The
Thank
will.
you, Becky. Thank you. Great points. So, Dr. Saab, we are getting a few questions from the audience. At what age do we start telling children about sexual abuse?
I think there is no specific age. When we start talking to the children, it is in context to their age. So if it's a toddler or a small child, we need to tell them about their body parts. They should know. One of the major hindrances when reporting a child in our hospitals, and let me tell you, at the Children's Hospital Lahore alone, we see about 150 cases of child abuse every year. So the major problem is they cannot identify their own body parts. Then they should know what parts are for the public to see, for the public not to see. And as they grow up, the knowledge base increases, and then we can deploy the good touch, bad touch, and later child safety, other issues. So it is not a matter of age, it is what should be taught at what age. So that is the
And there is, thank you, Dr. Saab, there is another question. Who have you observed to be the primary abusers?
Unfortunately, the ones that the child trusted.
Yeah.
Or the one
That's sad.
who has a power over the child. Remember, and now this is an open question and it can be very controversial as well, in every institution, be it a school, a hospital, or wherever, if there is a contact between an adult and a child, an abuser would try to gain entry. And it is the responsibility of the employer to see that. How many of us would do that?
Yeah.
We have to have a child offenders registry. In Pakistan, we do not have that. We need to know the psychological history of every employee, and we have to report every single case that comes up under our own eyes, because otherwise we are harboring abusers among us.
Okay, great points. Shayan, I'd like to ask you, you have worked closely with rural communities, and I in fact originate from a rural area. Unfortunately, in Pakistan, reprimanding children by hitting them considered totally normal, as you know. How can we bring about societal change to make such behaviors unacceptable? Are there any lessons that we can learn and adapt from other countries in our region?
Well, as we have been speaking about this, that rural communities, yes, there are certain forms of punishments which seem to be unnoticed, but is very traumatic for a child. Yeah. So the lessons that we learn again, that we need to hear the child. When the child speaks about any form of abuse, an adult's responsibility is to listen to that child. The parent normally just says, especially in our rural villages, if a child is raped by a father, a brother, an uncle, it's always put into the background. It's something that is so taboo that the child is just told to be quiet, and it's considered something that eventually the child starts blaming themselves for the abuse that has been inflicted on them. And if as a society, we need to reach out wherever we can through schools. There are many schools even in the rural areas. And if we start giving trainings to the people who can make a difference there through our government schools, through our police, that we need to listen to the child and we need to recognize abuse as it takes place. I think that would be one of the ways that we could prevent and we could make a difference in this.
Great, thank you. Dr. Saab, tell us about your experience. You developed the first hospital-based child protection unit in South Asia. The role of first responders, doctors and nurses is crucial to identify abuse. What resources and support is needed to better address the needs of children? Can this model be implemented across other different hospitals?
Of course. When we started off, and this was way back, 2005, we developed the first hospital-based child protection committee at the Children's Hospital, and it was a total volunteer body. Over the next 4 years, it was adopted in about 15 to 17 hospitals, and it was then taken as a part of the actual hospital work. The only hindrances that we see are the legislations regarding the victim of child abuse. They are not forthcoming. The law enforcing part is not that. But the best that we can do in a hospital setting is managing the child, letting him know he or she is not at fault. Then psychologically supporting them. In Pakistan, we have a lot of problem with low socioeconomic strata, and then we have to address that through our social means, through the financial means. It can be scaled up, and we have actually scaled it up. And now at this point in time, we have 10 hospital-based child protection committees in 10 districts of Punjab already. And we are planning that over the next couple of years, we will be covering the whole of Punjab with these hospital committees. And these are then connected to the school child protection committees and the community child protection committees, whose work is primarily preventative. But when a child is in fact abused, they are referred to the children's hospital, the child protection committee, who in turn manage, and if need be, there should be, now that is the point that we need, is the social welfare department, the child protection welfare bureau in Punjab, and the other legal authorities, where we can go and support these children in the legal way, because that is also required. That is one of the areas that we are still weak at, but I think it is extremely doable. We just need resources, the financial resources, and I think for that, most important is that the government should have the political will to do it.
Yeah, okay. Thank you, Dr. Saab. Deborah, would you like to add something?
No,
say about your organization or anything?
Well, yes. I mean, so my organization Fuji is about 14 years old, and we focus primarily on education. So we run a school from kindergarten to high school, as well as a scholarship program.
All right.
But of course, and I think as mentioned earlier, we are frontliners. So we're constantly, especially as you can imagine, with refugee children going through a lot of family issues, personal issues, we're the frontliner to really be able to see what's going on, what's abnormal, and be able to pick up on it. So what we've been doing is developing in our curriculum with partner NGOs, mental health, access to counseling, access to therapy for students, train the trainer for our teachers, equipping our refugee teachers with the skill set as well, training buddies, so older students to be able to like a peer-to-peer support, supporting their fellow students. And of course, I think what we do is we work very closely with our youth, and we get them to be youth champions in their communities, because they know their communities best, not us. We are still outsiders, and so they're able to communicate effectively across the cultural, religious, norms or taboos. Yeah. They can communicate to their communities, to the adults. And I just want to reiterate that it's not easy. It's one thing to say siyasi and rights and children need to be heard, but telling a parent this who just has had such a hard life and she just wants to put food on the table or keep the family alive, this really means nothing to them. So there are certain, I think, really strategies and ways of really getting people to buy into it over periods of time. It's very much easier said than done, but definitely involves knowing the communities you're working with, being committed. It's a long-term journey. It's a process for change. And I think generationally, working with the young really does help, because we're able to really break the cycle and build new mindsets and outlooks.
Thank you, Deborah. Thank you. So I think we have covered pretty much. Children's rights are the paramount and it needs to be protected. The best way to prevent child abuse and neglect is to stop it before it starts. Programs that provide support for parents and teach positive parenting skills are very important and necessary. Parents can learn how to communicate positively, discipline appropriately, and respond to their children's physical and emotional needs. Programs to prevent child abuse and neglect also help improve parent-child relationship and provide parents with social support. These support programs for parents may be held in homes, in schools, in medical or mental health clinics. I once again thank you all for taking out time. I would like to thank my panelists. Thank you so much for joining us here. And thank you, Deborah. Thank you, Nina, for joining us. That's it. Thank you. Thank you so much, ladies and gentlemen.